This is not an easy story for me to share. And trust me, I don't say that lightly. It's not a classic story about a rattling chain ghost, but it has absolutely haunted me for the last 2 decades. The main events took place when I was barely 4 or 5 years old, and that, right there, is the core of the problem. It's a period of life so distant that most of the surrounding details are frustratingly vague. Yet, the paralyzing feelings of fear, the sheer panic, they are as sharp as a newly broken piece of glass. It's this inability to grab onto the absolute truth, this gap in the tape, that makes it so terrifying, so real. To be honest, I feel genuinely uneasy just thinking about it. And this might be only the third time I've ever managed to tell the full, disturbing account. Now, you need a quick background to fully appreciate the impossible nightmare that unfolded. I was born and raised in an extremely close, huge family. When I say huge, I mean huge. We weren't just close. We were intertwined. Every aunt, every uncle, and all my cousins lived within about a mile of our house. All of us clustered around a massive park in a small Texas town. We were basically guarded by a living, breathing wall of family protection. Every single holiday, every weekend, was a reunion. It was safety defined. And here's an unsettling side note for the true crime fans out there. That very park is the modern location of the majority of the town that later experienced the dreadful and still unsolved sundown murders. It's like the land itself was cursed to hold dark secrets. And I believe I stumbled straight into one of them long before the park became a horror landmark. My mother, like any protective parent, was famously rigid about who watched us. She absolutely never trusted anyone but family to supervise my brother or me. My aunts and grandmother were the total opposite of the woman I'm about to describe. They were loving, fun, and treated me like their own kid. This fact, this impenetrable security detail, is the central, impossible mystery of the whole story. The memory of this terrifying experience was finally dragged into the light years later because, for as long as I can remember, I have been plagued by a series of recurring nightmares. They are always variations on the same chilling theme. I'm a small child in my childhood home, scrambling desperately to escape while something horrible chases me. This something is never visually distinct, but it is an overwhelming, massive, looming presence, a dark, tall shape reaching out from the shadows. It always catches me just as my hand reaches the doorknob, and I wake up instantly, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. I finally realized these dreams centered on fragmented yet vividly emotional memories of a babysitter I supposedly once had. And here's where the memory starts to feel like a glitch in the matrix. I can recall the specific details of the actions and the paralyzing fear, but everything else is just out of reach. I remember she was a middle-aged woman, but I cannot, for the life of me, recall her face. It's as if she was always standing in shadow, a faceless jailer designed specifically to terrify a child. Two specific incidents stand out in high definition. The first was her simple, sadistic form of punishment. Whenever I would get in trouble, I have no idea what the transgression was. I would be forced to sit outside on the back porch. This wasn't a warm, simple time out. It was usually winter, and I was only in my shorts and a t-shirt. I remember the air stinging my skin, the constant, bone-deep shivering, and just sitting there quietly, paralyzed by the fear that making any noise, complaining at all, would only escalate the problem. The cold was a deliberate, physical tool of the isolation she enforced. Now, the second memory, this is the one that still makes my breath catch, the one that truly feels like it was designed to leave lasting psychological damage. It was her favorite game. She had invented it, and it was a masterpiece of psychological terror intended to absolutely break a child's will. She actually called it hide and seek. But let me tell you, this was nothing of the sort. The ritual was chillingly consistent. She would turn off every single light in the house, plunging the entire space into a suffocating, absolute darkness. Then, she would go deep into one of the back rooms to hide. I was left completely alone in the front room, and the condition was simple, cruel, and non-negotiable. If I wanted to eat, or if I wanted to watch television, I had to find her first. She completely weaponized my most basic primal needs against me. It was the most severe form of control imaginable. I never had any real idea where she was, and the game always followed the same horrifying script. If I ever managed, through blind fear, to locate her in the dark, she wouldn't politely say, "Found you." Instead, she would jump out screaming like a complete, unhinged madwoman. It was a terrifying, shattering sound that seemed to physically rip through the darkness. And then, she would chase me. I distinctly remember her laughter at my genuine, infantile terror. It was a shrill, cutting sound of pure, sick enjoyment. The kind of noise a person makes when they are truly releasing something dark and twisted inside themselves. What was worse was the alternative. Often, I was simply too frozen with terror to even begin the search. I would just sit on the floor near the front door, whimpering, utterly unable to move past the archway leading into the central blackness of the house. The anxiety was a physical weight on my chest, and no matter how long I waited there, no matter how desperately hungry I became, and 4-year-old hunger can feel like a deadly emergency, she would never come out of hiding. I would sit for what felt like hours, maybe it was hours, with the terrifying silence of the house pressing down on me, knowing she was waiting, enjoying the sound of my slow burn distress. My brother, only a year older, would hover nearby, a tiny, powerless audience member to my personal torment. But I remember one instance with a horrifying, unnerving clarity. I was so small, and the hunger had become an absolute, painful physical need. It was a desperation so primal that it slowly gave me the desperate courage I needed to move. I was whimpering, shuffling along the dark back hallway, trying to find her. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the floorboards was a terrifying jump scare. I checked all the usual spots: the guest bathroom, the linen closets, my brother's bedroom. Nothing. The house felt empty. Yet I knew she was there, just out of sight, like a spider waiting in its web. I finally walked into my parents' bedroom, which was always the largest, darkest room, and stood there trying to figure out where a full-grown person could disappear to. That's when I saw her, a dark, indistinct shape beneath the massive, high-sitting bed, partially hidden by the long bed skirt. She was peeking out at me from under the fabric. We locked eyes, or at least, I locked my tiny, terrified eyes with the dark space where her face should have been. The total absence of expression was, bizarrely, the most expressive thing about the entire memory. I couldn't make out her features, but I had the horrifying, absolute certainty that she was smiling at me. She wasn't a person in that moment. She was like a crazy, feral animal crouching in a den. Then, she began to move. She slid herself out from under the bed, not walking, but moving along the floor with a sickening, inhuman speed, like a serpent or something purely predatory. The sheer shock of the movement was overwhelming. I remember screaming, turning to run as she finally made it to her feet, a massive shadow rising up behind me, and then darkness. The memory just cuts off. I don't know what happened in that final moment, and that terrifying, missing piece of the story, that gap in the tape, haunts me just as much as the memory of the event itself. For nearly 20 years, I never shared these memories with anyone. They seemed too distant, too bizarre, and frankly, too inconsistent with the reality of my incredibly protected childhood. I was completely convinced They had to be long-forgotten nightmares. Maybe some kind of weird psychological processing of unexplained childhood fear. I kept telling myself that the human mind can sometimes create false, hazy memories just to deal with things it can't file away. But the persistent, recurring nightmares were a constant irritant, a tiny, agonizing sliver of glass under the skin. So, one day in my 20s, when my older brother and I were home from college, we were just sitting around with my mom, the kind of casual setting where families trade funny stories and talk about old times. I took a deep breath, brought up the nightmares, and finally, I asked my mom point blank about the babysitter. The reaction I got was immediate and absolute confusion. My mother's brow furrowed, and she just stared at me, her expression going from casual to deeply troubled. She told me, with unwavering certainty, that she never hired babysitters for either of us. She repeated the family mantra: she was too protective, our family was too large and close, and she never trusted anyone but an aunt or my grandmother to watch us. She genuinely seemed bewildered, but also instantly worried, the way a mother feels when hearing a truly horrible, unknown story about her child from an era she thought was completely safe. She told me she truly couldn't even begin to fathom who I was talking about. My heart sank. Her certainty, combined with the faceless figure in my memories, convinced me, right then and there, that I must have completely imagined it all. Then, the very next day, the entire story pivoted from a haunting memory into a horrifying, confirmed reality. My brother brought it up when we were driving together. He looked out the window, his expression distant and troubled. And he just flat out said, "Yeah, I remember. I remember seeing you get taken outside and being forced to sit there in the cold. I always thought it was so horrible." I was absolutely floored. The shock wasn't just that he remembered it, but that he had carried that dark memory with him all these years. He, too, had no memory of the woman's face or name, but he confirmed the chilling atmosphere, the feeling of defenselessness that pervaded our small, protected home. He had only vague memories of the horrible, dark game, but he pointed out something absolutely critical, something I had forgotten. She had never targeted him with her torment. He was merely a witness, an audience member to my personal terror, a dynamic that likely instilled in him the same helpless fear I felt, the fear that made him unable to intervene. Then, he dropped the final, crucial detail, the reason for the punishment, a detail that was completely lost to me. He said I would often get in trouble because I would frequently use my imagination to tell elaborate stories, and the babysitter would get absolutely furious when she realized they were not factual. That, he explained, is what often resulted in me getting kicked out of the house. She wasn't just a cruel disciplinarian. She was a woman who actively hated and tried to crush the spirit and creativity of a 4-year-old. My brother was only 1 year older, barely a toddler himself, yet he remembered. He confessed that for years, he had tried to rationalize the events, playing them off as something he was simply too young to understand. But now, 20 years later, the facts were brutal. A cruel, faceless woman had terrorized me in our home, using our basic needs and my own imagination against me. And she had somehow slipped past the impenetrable barrier of our family. I haven't brought it back up to my mother. I honestly believe she has no idea, and I don't want to burden her with the guilt of a trauma she unknowingly allowed. But the question remains, and it's the worst part. Who the hell was she? How did she breach security? The terror of the confirmed memory is nothing compared to the enduring horror of the unknown ghost who once had the keys to my childhood home, only to vanish into the Texas night. I live in a small rural community in the eastern U.S., the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and the local diner still knows your coffee order by heart. It sounds idyllic, but trust me, small-town life is never as dull or uneventful as the travel brochures suggest. Thanks to my job in the medical field, I've met some of the most fascinating and sometimes unsettling characters, and I'm pretty well acquainted with our local police and emergency teams. You tend to feel safe when you know the faces holding the thin blue line. But my piece here is complicated. I'm single and live alone, and that's because I've been running from a stalker for years. I've already had to move twice trying to shake him off my trail. That history is why my current house isn't just a home, it's a fortress. I've got a large dog for protection, motion sensors, and security cameras covering every single approach. That paranoia, that necessity to always be watching, is the only reason the victim in this story was ever found. What's truly ironic is the location of my fortress. My house sits perfectly on a hill, giving me an almost strategic view of the entire street. I can see the fire department right down the road from my window, and the police station is just 2 blocks further. Next door to the firehouse is the county road department's parking lot. That lot is where they park all their heavy equipment and, crucially, their large, empty garbage trucks on weekends. And, because this is a small town, that lot has absolutely zero security cameras. It's the perfect blind spot. This nightmare unfolded on a Saturday evening. The county was busy, celebrating its annual Independence Day fair, barbecue, live music, the whole 9 yards. I skipped it. Fireworks are terrifying for my dog, and I prefer to avoid those massive crowds anyway. But the holiday meant the entire neighborhood was deserted, quiet as a tomb, long before the sun actually set. There was still a solid hour of daylight when I took my dog out back, and that's when I realized my vantage point wasn't just observing small-town life, it was observing a crime scene waiting to happen. I was just enjoying the quiet, the kind of stillness you only get right before a big, noisy holiday starts. Then, a large white pickup truck slowly rolled into view. It was big, clean, and completely unfamiliar. It wasn't driving, it was patrolling. I watched it creep down the street, and that little voice in the back of my head, the one trained by years of looking over my shoulder, started whispering. Sure enough, about 20 seconds later, it came back the other way. The driver had turned around, confirming he was actively scouting. This time, he didn't hesitate. He pulled into the road department's unmarked, vulnerable parking lot. Now, Bunnish, look, I'm not a busybody. People dump illegal stuff in those empty garbage trucks all the time. Old mattresses, broken appliances, just avoiding the hassle of the landfill. It's annoying, but it's harmless. But this wasn't that. The driver, a stocky guy of average height, didn't heave any furniture. Instead, he pulled out 3 huge, industrial-grade black trash bags from the back of the pickup. They were heavy, too heavy. He tossed them one by one into the deep hopper of the garbage truck, and they landed with a sick, dense thud that carried clearly across the quiet street. He didn't linger. He got back in the truck and peeled out. I told myself, don't be the crazy neighbor. But that gut feeling, it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a shout. This was disposal, not just dumping. Something about the furtive speed, the heavy weight, and the precise timing on a holiday weekend felt calculated and utterly wrong. If I ignored it, those bags would be compacted Tuesday morning, lost forever. I couldn't risk it, so I grabbed my phone and called the police. Since the station was practically next door, the response was immediate. I quickly put the dog inside, cutting down on the noise, and walked across the street to meet the young officer who arrived. I knew his face from around town. He looked slightly impatient, probably annoyed he was dealing with a simple dumping complaint on a holiday. I gave him the details and pointed out the exact truck. He found the 3 bags nestled inside the hopper. He took a couple of routine photos, pulled on his nitrile gloves, and told me to stand back. The knots on the bags were tight, pulled taut, like the person who tied them was desperate to keep the contents contained. It took him a minute of frustrating struggle to get the top of the first bag loose. Finally, he pulled the plastic open just enough to peer inside. He looked for maybe 2 seconds, then let the plastic snap shut. He turned his back to me, taking 2 shaky steps away from the truck. I saw his shoulders slump, and then I heard the ragged, choked hiss under his breath. "What is it?" I demanded, my own blood turning to ice water. He raised his radio, his hand trembling. He gave a code, a specific, terrible code, reserved for the discovery of human remains. His voice was shaking so badly, the dispatcher asked him to repeat it. Then he lowered the radio and looked at me, his face bleached white in the fading sunlight. "It's a body." The whole world seemed to tilt. The horror wasn't just in the words, it was in the sickening realization of what the meticulous packaging meant. The contents had been cut into pieces. 10 minutes later, the county sheriff arrived, followed quickly by the coroner. The silent, deserted street was instantly ablaze with flashing blue and red lights, transformed from a small-town holiday prelude into a grotesque, neon-lit crime scene. With the sheriff and the coroner now processing the grim contents of the garbage truck, the investigation immediately turned to my house, the only source of intelligence. The first officer, now joined by a detective, followed me inside. We pulled up the surveillance footage on my big screen, turning my living room into a temporary command post. We watched the tape repeatedly, the truck's suspicious pass, the calculated turn, the quick, practiced movements of the stocky man unloading the 3 dense bags. The frustration was immense. My cameras caught the truck, but that tiny obstruction, a branch, a trick of the light, had rendered the license plate an absolute blur. And the driver was just out of frame when he made the deposit. We paused, zoomed, and the officers took pages of notes, desperate for any small detail, a bumper sticker, a dent, anything that could identify that white pickup. They requested copies of the video, and I handed over the files for the entire week, hoping he had scouted the area before the crime, hoping he'd made a mistake days earlier. The details that have leaked out since are few, but they're brutal. The body was, in fact, in pieces. That's all I know for sure. The age, the gender, the cause of death. The police haven't released anything official. Maybe they haven't even identified the victim yet. But the constant reminder is right next door. A patrol car is now permanently stationed at the fire department. A silent, unforgiving monument to the violence that unfolded on our quiet street. This is the part that truly keeps me awake. The guy who dumped that body, he's a local. He had to be. He knew that specific parking lot was a blind spot, that the empty trucks would sit there for 3 days over the holiday, giving the remains time to be buried deep under piles of other people's trash. It was a cold, calculated plan for perfect disposal. He lives among us. He could be anyone, someone I see at the post office, someone I've smiled at, someone I've treated at the clinic. Thinking about that level of premeditation makes me feel physically ill. To know a murderer scouted my street, used a community resource as a dumping ground, and may have done this before, it's an infection in the very soul of this small town. And that's when the fear circles back to me. If I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, if I had ignored that strong, screaming gut feeling, that victim would have been lost forever. The killer would have gotten away with it, gaining confidence, maybe preparing for another victim. I saved that person's case from being a permanent cold case. But in doing so, I have drawn attention to my quiet hill, my strategic home, and my cameras. The killer knows someone saw him. They know they were thwarted by a witness. I look at my door, then at the perpetual police car next door, and I realize I am no longer safe here. Dear God, I hope it's not me who ends up in one of those black bags next time. I thought I escaped the first time I moved. I guess it's time to pack my dog and my cameras and start over. Third time's the charm, right? I have no other choice. This happened a few years ago, but the details are still completely clear in my head. I was going through a rough patch, the kind that hits you hard. My boyfriend, who was also my best friend, had just dumped me. 4 years, just gone. I was left with this enormous, painful void. I was a college student, 20 years old, and honestly, a bit of a homebody. So, I figured, maybe I could fix the loneliness with connection, not romance. That's why I downloaded Meet Me. My profile was strictly casual. Not dating, just trying to meet new people in the area. I was just trying to put myself out there, looking for something to fill the space where that relationship used to be. Then, he messaged me. It started innocently, about something related to the university, the giant annual dance-a-thon we did to raise money for the local children's hospital. I told him my dance team always performed there, a huge event every spring. And this is where he built his foundation of trust. He told me he was actually one of the children the event had supported when he was little. Now, come on, how cool is that? It was a genuinely heartwarming detail. It made him seem safe, kind, and responsible. We spent a good half hour talking about his experience with the hospital, and I truly felt like I was making a legitimate, non-creepy connection. But the conversation faded, as online chats do. It was getting late, my eyelids were heavy, and I told him I was heading to bed. I closed the app, put my phone on the nightstand, and settled in. I was feeling surprisingly good. A little distraction had helped. Then, the screen glowed again. I grabbed my phone, ready to read the simple goodnight I expected. Instead, I saw a notification preview that seemed to stretch across the entire screen. This dude hadn't sent a text, he'd sent a novel. It wasn't just long, it felt heavy. And the second I saw the sheer volume of that unprompted message, I knew instantly something was very, very wrong. I didn't even read the message. I immediately deleted the notification, deleted the app, and deleted the entire account. The sudden rush of intensity was absolutely terrifying. But the curiosity, the morbid need to know what kind of unhinged mind wrote a message that long, made me reopen the ghost of the conversation in my mind. The exact words are gone, but the feeling of dissecting that never-ending block of text is etched in my memory because he didn't use a single piece of punctuation. The first novel went something like this: a desperate, rambling confession. Look, I will be honest, I really want to keep talking to you. In fact, I'd actually like to take you on a date sometime. You seem like a really nice girl, and very sweet and interesting. I think we would get along extremely well. I'm kind of alone in this world. He followed that with a long, drawn-out monologue about his soul-crushing loneliness. It was a classic pity play, designed to make me feel sorry for him. But coming from a man who was about 7 years my senior, I was 20, it felt like a massive red flag, a vacuum of need being dumped directly onto me. Despite the screaming alarm bells, I tried to be gentle. I didn't want to hurt the feelings of the charity kid from earlier. So I replied, politely but firmly, "Thank you, but I was not interested in dating." I wished him a good night again. That was my mistake. My gentle rejection only seemed to trigger something dark and possessive. The nice guy vanished, replaced by a stalker with a god complex. Minutes later, the second novel landed. This one wasn't about loneliness. It was about destiny. I don't think you understand. You are perfect for me. You were made for me. I'm sure of it. God speaks to me, you know. God wants us to be together, and we will be one day. You'll be mine. The introduction of the divine element escalated the situation from awkward to utterly horrifying. This wasn't a guy asking me out. He was announcing a prophecy. He treated my refusal like an annoying administrative error that needed to be corrected by a higher power. I kept trying to respond, weakly, confusedly, which only seemed to validate his delusion that I was testing him. The subsequent sentences were the most chilling lines I have ever read in my life. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but God has decided this. Who are we to deny Him His plan? Someday in the future, we will end up together. You will realize it soon. We're going to have 3 children. I know their names, 2 boys, 1 girl. God already spoke their names to me. I wrote them down when I was 7 years old. Take a moment to absorb that. He wasn't just predicting a life with someone. He had named our children and committed them to paper when he was a child. I wasn't a person with agency. I was a specific character fulfilling a decades-old script he'd written. The final sentence was the definitive line between creepy fantasy and actual threat. Do you know how I know you're going to be my wife? Because I wrote your name down with it? You will be my wife. Don't make a mistake. God is talking to me now. He's saying your name to me. I can't let you leave. That sentence, I can't let you leave, sent a bolt of ice through me. It was no longer religious talk. It was a clear assertion of control. I didn't hesitate this time. Blocked, reported, and the app was wiped from my phone. I went to bed, utterly shaken, consumed by the terrifying knowledge that a stranger, a local man who seemed so harmless, was actively convinced that God had destined him to own me. I learned a cold lesson that night. When someone is truly obsessed, blocking them online doesn't end the problem. It just redirects the target. I woke up the next morning, expecting the nightmare to be over. I was so wrong. He had found me on Facebook. The chilling speed of his action proved how focused he was. I had deleted my Meet Me profile entirely, yet here he was, bypassing the digital firewall. My direct messages were filled with the same frantic, unpunctuated garbage. But now his tone was one of aggressive, self-righteous injury. Where did you go? How could you do this to me? You're denying your fate. He went on and on, trying to message me all morning. It felt like a physical invasion, like he was standing right outside my dorm room door. This wasn't just delusion, this was stalking. The fear became real, physical panic. I finally snapped. All the politeness was gone. I sent him one final, extremely aggressive message, telling him to leave me alone and that I was reporting him to the police. Then, I blocked him everywhere I could think of. But the real terror had already set in. I deleted all social media apps off my phone for the next few days. Why? Because in those first few, innocent chats, I had let slip vital information. He was local, and I had told him my major and which campus clubs I was active in. He didn't just know my name, he knew my routine. He could have shown up to my next dance practice, my next lecture, or my apartment complex. I was genuinely, physically terrified that this guy, who believed God had personally ordained me as the mother of his children, was going to come find me. I immediately went to my roommates, explained everything, and asked them to stay home with me. They didn't even hesitate. For the next 3 days, we were on high alert, creating a bubble of safety. Every unfamiliar face, every sound outside the door, sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. Thankfully, he never did show up, and the messages finally stopped after the permanent block. That was the end of it. But the shadow of that encounter, the realization of how quickly an innocuous chat can turn into a horrifying, obsessive claim on your life, has never fully faded. It's an unfortunate, almost universal truth. Trauma attracts drama. The deep, heavy kind of drama that leaves lasting scars. I was trapped in a toxic, borderline abusive friendship with a girl from the ages of 9 to 12. Those crucial, formative years where your entire sense of self is being built. And mine? Well, my foundation was already shattered. To understand why I was so vulnerable, you have to understand my background. I grew up in what I can only describe as a thunderous household. A place where the air was always thick with unspoken rage. My parents detested each other, and my immediate and extended family were constantly plagued by untreated mental illness and drug addiction. Needless to say, I was a walking ball of anxiety, a truly anxious kid who was, tragically, drawn to unstable people. And the worst part? They were drawn right back to me, like a shark to blood in the water. I was easy prey. I was a shy preteen in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Like so many other kids trying to survive a bad home situation, I used the internet, specifically AM, as a kind of secret sanctuary, a place to vent the rage and frustration I couldn't express in real life. AOL, Instant Messenger, MySpace, Facebook. These were my outlets, but I wasn't careless. I kept my profiles locked down, private. I never accepted a friend request from a stranger. I was searching for connection, yes, but I was desperate for safety. That illusion of safety vanished the day I met Tanya. That's not her real name, by the way. I don't ever want her stumbling across this. Tanya and I met in elementary school, right when the chaos at my house reached a fever pitch. I genuinely believe she didn't just see a potential friend. She sensed the vulnerability and the chaos practically radiating off me. She saw a child with a crumbling foundation, and with the cold instinct of a true manipulator, she began to take advantage. In the beginning, her malice was subtle. They never just start with the final attack, do they? It was a slow, creeping rot, a series of petty cruelties designed to test my boundaries. She'd gaslight me into begging my mom to stay on the computer until 2 in the morning so we could visit some sketchy websites, effectively forcing me to get in trouble. Or she would suddenly ghost me for days because I didn't lend her my favorite pen, only to reappear acting like nothing happened. The moment that stands out, the one that makes my skin crawl, is the white-hot, disproportionate rage in her eyes when I failed to nail a Guitar Hero solo. My mom, bless her soul, didn't like Tanya, not one bit, and I've learned since that a mother's intuition about your friends is almost always right. God, I wish I had listened to her before Tanya unleashed the real damage. The abuse shifted from mere cruelty to calculated, venomous malice around age 11. Tanya became openly, almost physically, jealous of my academic success. She was smart, yes, but she made it a point to mock my grades, twisting the achievement into a brutal insult. Her favorite line? She'd comment that since I wasn't pretty enough, having good grades was a necessary balance. Every snide remark about my weight or my looks was meant to chip away at the self-esteem I barely possessed. It took me a decade, until now, as a 22-year-old, to finally manage to rebuild that fractured image. As a result of this mounting jealousy and resentment, Tanya decided to stop testing the waters and actively plot my downfall. This girl wasn't just mean. She was methodically trying to ruin the last scrap of self-worth I had left. The plotting began, covertly, in the 6th grade. Here's the dark irony. Tanya and I were almost inseparable that year. I was desperate for genuine connection, so I wanted to do absolutely everything with her. We'd spend all day talking at school. Then we'd chat all night on AIM until the screen glow blurred and my eyes burned. But beneath her act of camaraderie, something truly sick was brewing. It was one evening, deep into October 2010. We were doing what all hormonal preteens do, talking about boys. Our conversation inevitably drifted to who we liked. Due to the genuinely awful relationship I had with my father, I had deep-seated trust issues with boys, even at that age, so it was rare for me to develop a crush. But Tanya was ready with her hook, perfectly baited. "Do you know Mark, the kid in my class?" she asked. "Yeah, why?" I typed back, my fingers hovering. Then came the line that changed everything. "I heard he likes you?" "Totally. He told me himself," she claimed, delivering it with the perfect, whispered confidence of a true friend. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it was galloping. The boy liked me? Impossible. I was the girl she constantly told was not pretty enough. My mind raced. Could this be real? "What? No way," I typed, giddy, disbelief washing over me. She pressed the advantage, sealing the deal. "You want me to talk to him? I can give him your AM username." Yeah. Yes, of course. OMG, thank you." I was practically vibrating in my seat. 11-year-old me, the perpetually anxious kid who craved external validation, truly believed I was about to have my first real relationship. This feeling, this pure, blinding rush of validation, was the very thing she knew I needed, and the very thing she had been plotting to steal. For the next 6 months, Mark, who was, in reality, Tanya, became the absolute center of my universe. She had constructed this meticulous, elaborate character, this whole fantasy life. She strung along my emotions, maintaining the charade even when we hung out in person. She'd offer these smug, knowing smiles, telling me she was so happy for us, and that Mark and I made a cute couple. Think about that for a second. The cruelty wasn't just the lie itself. It was watching me thrive on that lie, actively encouraging my happiness, all while knowing that the foundation of my joy was a time bomb she held the detonator for. Then came the explosion. April 1st. I was getting ready for bed, winding down, when I heard that classic, unforgettable sound from my iPod Touch, the famous AOL ding. That sound used to mean connection, safety, and affection. I checked the notification, a message from the username I knew as Mark. I opened it, and there it was, a low-resolution image. It wasn't Mark's face, it was Tanya's. She was holding a crudely handwritten sign, defiant and triumphant, that read, "Happy April Fool's Day." The shock was so profound, I actually started laughing at first, a shaky, hysterical sound. I thought, okay, she got me. This is just a bad joke. She'll take it back in a second. Wrong. The realization hit me next, hard and clean, like a punch to the gut. The air left my lungs, and I collapsed into the most profound, ragged sobs of betrayal I had ever known. Tanya had been planning this since October 2010. She had catfished me for half a year, methodically stringing along my most fragile emotions, fully aware that I was already mentally unstable. She immediately followed up the photo with a torrent of vicious messages, digital poison designed to inflict maximum pain. "You were stupid to even think Mark would like you in the first place," she typed. "You're dumb for not asking for his number." It was a complete, deliberate demolition of my identity. I ran straight to my mom. My mother, seeing the absolute devastation in my face, became livid, a kind of cold, quiet rage that was terrifying. She didn't hesitate. She called Tanya's mom immediately, and I could hear her voice vibrating through the phone, demanding. My mom told Tanya's mother, in no uncertain terms, to tell her daughter never to speak to me again. I was crushed, devastated by the loss of the friendship, but mostly by the brutal truth. My best friend had toyed with my loyalty and my heart simply because she could. The psychological warfare didn't stop with the breakup. In the months that followed, leading into 7th grade, Tanya tried multiple times to lure me back into her orbit through guilt and manipulation. Her final, most vile attempt came just days after my birthday in August. I got a message from her, completely out of the blue, telling me that her mother, a sweet, kind woman, had just died in a horrible car crash. She added grotesque details, claiming her body was dismembered and that they could only identify her by her head and a wedding ring. I was immediately hysterical. Grief and pity overwhelmed me. I started talking to Tanya again, asking when the funeral would be, offering comfort. Her response was one of the most chilling things I've ever experienced. Seconds later, after relaying those grisly, imagined details, she messaged back, her tone triumphant. She was only kidding. It was just another prank. She then sent a video of herself, her face twisted in triumphant glee, telling me I was stupid to have believed such a ridiculous, horrific story. I was utterly disgusted. What kind of person, what 12-year-old, conjures up a parent's brutal, dismembered death just to play a sick joke? She had crossed a line that felt truly evil. She then revealed her final, ugly intent. At the beginning of 7th grade, she made friends with a girl named Kay. They invited me to sit with them at their lunch table, and because I was still desperate and stupidly clinging to the hope of acceptance, I accepted. I was immediately surrounded by an endless torrent of insults, mocking laughter, and whispers behind my back. Finally, she sent a message that cut to the quick. She said she hated me, was never my friend, and that I deserved every single bit of the pain she put me through the year prior. That was it. I had endured her malicious behavior for 4 years, and I couldn't handle the psychological battering anymore. I went to my mom one last time, and this time, she didn't just call Tanya's mother, she called the police. My mother was done. She saw that Tanya was an online predator, using the internet to stalk, harass, and emotionally abuse her child, and she shut it down. My mom forced me to delete my AIM account, cutting the digital cord forever, and Tanya's mom was strictly warned that any further contact would result in legal action. My mom told me to move lunch tables, to just get up, walk away, and find somewhere safe to sit. But honestly, I was hellbound not to let Tanya win. She had spent a year trying to systematically dismantle my sense of self, and there was absolutely no way I was going to give her the satisfying victory of watching me retreat. For the entirety of 7th grade, I showed up. I sat at that same lunch table, right across from her and Kay, but I spoke only to my friends, positioned on the other side of me. I never once looked at Tanya. I never acknowledged her. I never spoke to her. I never gave her any sort of attention, not even a flicker of eye contact. My strategy was pure, calculated, cold indifference. I treated her as though she were transparent. She was a zero. My refusal to break, my sheer silence, was my armor and my ultimate act of defiance. It was perfect. Tanya didn't get the satisfying misery she planned for me. She got silence and utter rejection. Even Kay looked terrified of me after the police got involved with her family. It's been 10 years now, a full decade, and I haven't spoken a single word to Tanya. The anxious, damaged girl she tried to shatter is long gone, replaced by someone stronger. I am 22 years old now, and I didn't just survive, I thrived. I earned 2 bachelor's degrees, one in psychology and the other in history, and I'm currently working toward my master's in clinical social work, dedicating my life to understanding and healing the exact kind of emotional trauma she inflicted. Her hate didn't destroy me. It fueled me. Tanya did other unspeakable things that I could fill another whole story with. But writing this one has finally given me the closure I desperately needed over that dark part of my childhood. And I thank God every single day for my mom. Her intervention was my lifeline. I truly don't know where I'd be without her fierce, protective love. As for Tanya, I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and I absolutely prefer it that way, on the off chance she stumbles upon this story. But I do have one final, powerful message for her. Your jealousy didn't win, Tanya. Your hatred didn't break me. It only forged me into the person I am today, a successful adult who builds people up instead of tearing them down. And I truly hope that karma does not come around one day to bite you in the ass, because I know exactly how painful your bite can be. This whole story is something I've been carrying with me, something that started when I was just 17 years old. And honestly, the ripples are still hitting me today. That time of my life, man, it felt like being stuck in quicksand. I was totally lost, completely directionless, and trapped in this miserable factory job. The worst part, though, was my coworkers. They straight up hated me. And why? Because I spoke clearly. They decided I was some rich kid slumming it. And they're mocking, the relentless digs about my accent, the snide little comments. It was a constant, grinding torture. Every Friday, when the factory let us out for a half day, I was running on fumes, right at my breaking point. I'd just spend the rest of the afternoon drifting through the city streets, desperate for any escape. That one Friday, the bullying had been absolutely brutal. I was burning with humiliation. I spent hours hitting every single recruitment office I could find. Police, Army, Navy, Air Force, even the International Red Cross. I wasn't looking for a career. I was looking for a one-way ticket out. After a while, I had a heavy backpack full of colorful, useless career pamphlets, and the same terrifying realization: I still had zero clue what to do with my life. My mind was just a dark, empty echo chamber. Then, I turned a corner onto a side street, and I saw it. The sign was sitting innocently on the sidewalk, but it hit me like a spotlight. I can still see the words perfectly. Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in. I mean, seriously? It was like someone had taken a mental photograph of my self-doubt and printed a billboard of it. I looked up at the building. Big, fancy sign. The words spelled out, clear as day, the Church of Scientology. Now look, I wasn't living under a rock. I knew about Scientology. I'd heard the crazy stuff, the whispers of what goes on behind the velvet ropes, the forced separations, the wild demands. But here's where my teen curiosity and my own stupidity collided. Tom Cruise was my favorite actor. And hey, he seemed to have his life totally figured out. Right? My famous last words, I thought to myself, as I swallowed my doubt and walked through the doors. The place was immaculate, sparkling. And the lady who met me was the definition of cheerful. Almost too cheerful. I asked to speak to someone about the church and that test. She flashed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and told me to take a seat. A minute later, I met Allen, the director of that local Scientology center. He took me into this small, private room. The first thing that stood out, almost intimidatingly, was the giant portrait of L. Ron Hubbard staring down from the wall, silent and judgmental. Allen was brilliant. He was everything I needed, calm, incredibly attentive, and he made me feel like my feelings were the most important thing in the world. I opened up, telling him how miserable and lost I was. He nodded slowly, with this deep, caring sincerity that made me feel like I finally had an ally. After that talk, I didn't just agree to the test. I practically begged for it. He gave me the packet and left. 2 hours. I'm not exaggerating. 2 hours of relentless, invasive questions. 500 questions. Diving into every dark corner of my personality, my history, my family. It was less of a test and more of an interrogation of the soul. When I finally handed the massive stack back, the receptionist told me it would take time to process. Allen, she said, had instructed her to take me to their private cinema in the meantime. I was expecting a projector in a broom closet, Instead, I walked into a full-blown auditorium, big enough for 50 people, and I was the only soul sitting there. It was bizarre, honestly, unsettling, being the sole audience member in a cult's movie theaters. The film was about 30 minutes of pure psychological conditioning. A narrator with the smoothest voice imaginable explained those irrational fears, the things that keep you checking the door lock 8 times. Then, it got truly sinister, diving deep into their core concept of the reactive mind and something they called engrams. They argued that traumatic events, especially those that happened to your mother while she was pregnant with you, were recorded and lodged in your unconscious, sabotaging your whole life. The film gave this specific, ridiculous example. Your mom was sick on a flight while carrying you, and now, boom, you have a phobia of flying. I even vividly recall them mentioning an event involving rotten eggs and the lasting psychological damage they could inflict. It sounded absolutely absurd. But when you're 17 and desperate, the idea that a single, hidden cause is responsible for your misery is wildly compelling. It made me feel like I wasn't just depressed, I was broken, and they held the blueprint for the fix. The film ended, and I was taken back to Alan's office. This was the moment they delivered the final, psychological punch. Alan reviewed the results with a grave, almost pitying sigh. He didn't sugarcoat a thing. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most unmotivated people he had ever met, that I was lacking cognitive thinking, and at worst of all, a waste of talent. His words were devastating. They confirmed every single insecurity, every negative thing my coworkers had ever suggested. I felt completely gutted. But Alan was ready for the breakdown. He immediately softened. "But he whispered, leaning across the desk. "We know why you feel this way, and we have the technology to help you reach your true potential." He immediately handed me 4 books and a DVD and insisted I consume them before my course. I asked about the course, and he informed me he'd already signed me up at the center. No discussion, just a declaration. He stressed that if I didn't do this course, my life would spiral out of control and that I needed to act now. He got me to fork over a hefty sum of money, a huge chunk of cash, for a kid earning factory wages, and said I'd get the exact start date in a month. I left the center, ran straight home, and immediately started devouring the books. That whole weekend, I was locked away, reading, rereading, and watching that DVD on loop, totally immersing myself. The hook was set. The next few weeks, man, they were a blur. But they were also a terrifying psychological shift. I had become completely obsessed. The books weren't just reading material, they were my new reality. I started taking these meticulous notes about myself, my anxieties, my entire family history. I was constantly emailing Alan with my questions, my discoveries, and he was always right there, guiding me, reinforcing the doctrine. And the doctrine was chillingly effective. My mother was the problem. The engram theory, that concept of trauma passed down, it took hold like a parasite. Alan and those books convinced me that every single thing wrong with my life, every moment of weakness, every damn frustration at that factory job, was the result of the engrams she'd involuntarily given me while she was pregnant. All my self-hatred, it was perfectly, systemically redirected onto her. I started treating my mother like a stranger, worse than a stranger, like a disease. I'd snap at her, swear under my breath, and deliberately ignore her existence in the house, creating this toxic, freezing cold atmosphere. When I confessed my rising resentment to Alan over email, his advice was the final, devastating piece of manipulation. He told me that if she was truly the catalyst for my unhappiness, then maybe I shouldn't just resent her. Maybe I should consider disconnecting. Just like that. The word was cold, clinical, and total. It meant cutting her out of my life, forever. And I took that trash seriously. I started making actual plans, detailed steps, to erase her influence entirely. By the time the course date approached, I had totally fractured. I developed this insane God complex. The literature promised me a future as a clear, a superior spiritual being, and I fully bought into the hype. I looked at my parents and my siblings, and I saw them as weak, as beings utterly stuck in the spiritual muck I was about to transcend. The arrogance was a drug. It made me a terrible person, truly spiteful, venomous, convinced of my own imminent superiority. Then, just days before I was supposed to report to the center, the bubble burst. I walked into the house and found my mom and dad waiting. Their faces were etched with this raw fear. They told me they were desperately worried, and my dad held up a box. They had searched my room. Inside were all the Scientology books, the DVD, the evidence of my radicalizations. I exploded. I screamed at them, absolutely screamed, hurling the most wicked, unforgivable things at my parents. I told them I was leaving, that I never wanted to see them again, that they were the root of all my misery. It was hours of chaotic, tear-soaked fighting. But here's the thing, they fought for me. Even as I spat poison, they kept trying to reach their son. My father finally landed the blow that shattered my delusion. He said, "If you were so miserable, if the job was so bad, why didn't you just tell us? You went to strangers instead of your family. That question, why didn't you tell us?" It was the truth, delivered like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe I had chosen a dangerous cult over the people who loved me. Later that night, after the screaming stopped and the silence was deafening, they didn't punish me. They sat me down and held me. I looked at their tired, tear-stained faces and realized the terrifying reality. After 3 weeks of my deliberate, hateful cruelty, they still loved me. They had clawed me back from the edge. The very next day, I knew what I had to do. I felt this incredible sense of clarity, even though I was completely drained. The first thing I did was fire off an email to Alan. Simple, direct. I told him I was not coming back for the course. I was done. Alan's response was immediate, and the mask completely dropped. He was frantic. He immediately demanded to know why. Was it my family? Was I being forced to leave them? He was trying desperately to reimplant the doubt, the wedge between me and my parents. I ignored him completely, but the emails kept coming. And over the next few weeks, they escalated from pushy to genuinely unhinged. Alan was losing it. He kept telling me to leave my family now and promised I could live at the center. They would protect me. He kept repeating the sinister mantra, "It's your mother. She's your suppressor. She's ruining your life." Then, he crossed a line I will never forget. It was a thinly veiled, cold-blooded threat. He wrote something along the lines of how he wouldn't be surprised if he read in the papers that I was found dead because I chose to stay in my miserable, uncleared life. It was a terrifying glimpse into the darkness of that organization, but I just kept deleting and ignoring. And then came the weirdest one. It was an email containing nothing but long, dense lines of binary code, zeros and ones. I mean, literal tech madness, out of sheer, desperate curiosity. I ran the code through an online translator. It came back as total gibberish, random mixed-up letters and numbers. Nothing coherent. It was purely designed to be a psychological attack, to unnerve me, to make me doubt my own sanity. That was the last straw. I finally blocked Alan's email address. Here's the thing that brings the horror right up to the present day. Blocking Alan didn't stop them. The organizational shadow never left. 2 or 3 times a year, every single year since I was 17, I get a new email. It's never Alan, but always someone new. A new name, a new, clean email address, always from The Church of Scientology. The messages are always the same. How are you? We heard about your case. We're worried about you and your family. They have a file on me, and they never close it. When I get them, I immediately block the new address, but they just keep regenerating. It's this cold, persistent, organized attempt to reel me back in, proving that once you walk into that building, you are on their radar forever. I'm telling you this story right now because I just got one of those emails the other day, and it was a stark reminder of how close I came to losing everything. My family, my sanity, my life. So please, I beg you, do not, under any circumstances, walk into a Church of Scientology center. Do not let that tempting sign trick you. If they can take a vulnerable, desperate kid like me and turn me into a spiteful, arrogant monster in just a few short weeks of reading, imagine what they can do to a person in a few months or a year. I was lucky. I had parents who loved me enough to stage an intervention, to fight for me, and to pull me back from the psychological edge. If you are lost, sad, or upset, please talk to the people who actually care. Your family, your friends, a doctor, a real professional. When you are down, do not let strangers use your pain to turn you against the world. Take it from me, I got out, I got myself together, and I found my own path. I'm happy, I'm confident, and I'm thriving now. But that cold, institutional shadow of the cult is still out there, proving that sometimes the true horror story is the one that promises to save you.